So, you've had an interest in children's television from a young age. What started that?
My family, we moved from Birmingham to Brundage for Dad to be a preacher here, and that was in 1982 when I was 7 years old, or 8, I guess it was 8. For the first time I started seeing a program on Channel 12 out of Montgomery, the NBC affiliate, called Young World. And it was a very popular program back in the day when we didn't have as many options for television as children do today. And I loved the program and started writing letters to the hostess. Her name was Marge Payne, and she would write back, and eventually we corresponded about, I was a puppeteer, and we talked about the puppets on her program, and she eventually invited me to come there and bring my puppets, and that started an opportunity, an invitation to come back regularly, which I did for the next 5 years until that program went off the air. But I vividly remember walking into the studio that day and seeing in person, under all the lights and the cameras, what I had seen on television that I loved so much. And I thought at that moment, this is what I want to do. I want to have a children's television program. And so I came back home and turned my room into the Young World set. And my first camera was a little box, but soon my parents got me a closed circuit television camera, like a security camera, that I could see myself on the little black and white TV under there. And I would close the door to my room and pretend that I was making a program. And that's how it began.
But you were already a puppeteer?
Yes.
Now how did you get started with puppeteering?
When I was 4, we were living in Andalusia, and Dad was preaching there. And one Sunday afternoon, before Vacation Bible School was scheduled to start that night, my mother needed to make a couple of puppets for them to have. And she had never made puppets before, but she was a seamstress. And so she got a paper plate and traced it for the shape of the head. And the story is, as she says, I stood by the sewing machine and begged to play with these puppets while they were being made. And she would take them out and let me play with them. And that started the love of puppets. And I did my first puppet show, I think, when I was 4 in kindergarten, or 4-year kindergarten. And I would say, will you make me one more? Will you make me one more? And eventually that turned into about 80 puppets.
Oh, wow.
Muppet kind of puppets. And I would do puppet shows as a child. And then we heard that there was a ventriloquist coming to Elba, and they took me to a church in Elba to meet a ventriloquist. Well, that ignited my interest in that, so then I ended up taking a correspondence course and became a certified professional, certified professional ventriloquist when I was 11 or 12, and saved up my money from doing puppet shows to buy my professional figure, and I still have him to this day. He and I flew to New York to perform in 1986. I was 12, and that was our big exposure. We've performed at Opryland Hotel, did a lot of that sort of thing through the years. Yeah.
It's really neat. Now, as far as the children's programming in later years, did you still had a passion for it when you became an adult, and did you pursue that as a career? Did you do that as a hobby? How did it work out?
What happened was Young World went off the air in 1987. And I had grown up watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood too. And so I kind of migrated back toward Mr. Rogers. I was also a budding musician, a pianist. I had started playing the piano at 4. And of course, you know that's what my official training is in, music education. But one day I was a junior in high school, and I heard, I don't know how I happened to be watching Mr. Rogers. I don't remember if I, left it for a while and came back to it, but for whatever reason, this one day I was watching it and I heard the introduction that was being played by the pianist. You couldn't see him, but I thought, I heard it for the first time and I thought, that's how I want to play. And so I wrote Mr. Rogers a letter, and that ended up, he would always write people back. And he thanked me for my interest in their musician, Johnny Costa, who is a phenomenal jazz pianist, and he sat live on the set every time they made the program and played the music, and it was never played the same way twice. Well, what happened was I learned that Johnny was improvising this music and it wasn't written down, and I thought, I want to learn to play it badly enough. So I got a record of the music and started listening to it and dropped the needle, and then I would stop and practice until I learned to play it. And then I contacted Mr. Rogers' company and asked about how can I get a letter to Johnny Costa, and that started correspondence there, and he wrote back to encourage me to study music and so forth, and to this day he's the finest jazz pianist I've ever heard. He passed away 5 years later. I dreamed to meet him because his fingers would just fly, and some of the runs that I still wonder if I'm fingering the way that he did. But he passed away. Mr. Rogers learned that I had worked to play the music for his program, and he invited me to come up to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and spend some time with him in the studio there, and I got to play for him. And
so you met Mr. Rogers.
Oh yeah, yeah. And so that just further, how would I say it? It further convinced me that that was the area of work that I wanted to do. So I was still an undergraduate student in college. That visit was in 1997. I was 23. And I had been volunteering at Troy State University. I was a music student, but I would volunteer in the afternoons at the television station on campus. And so I was doing that before I went to visit Mr. Rogers, and when I came back, I said to them, I'd like to try to create a pilot for a children's television program. And they were agreeable to that. As long as I brought the creative part, they said, we will give you a crew, camera people and all of that. And that's how it began. We created 2 episodes of a pilot program in 1997 called Friendship Street, and they aired on Troy State University television. And then in 1999, I returned to do my master's degree there, and we revamped it and made it into Here We Grow.
Here We Grow,
yes.
Which I still have the VHS
Yes,
for.
this is your copy. I was so delighted to see that you have it. And so you and I worked on this together,
Yes.
and you had a huge role in helping paint the backdrop for that, and the turtle shell that you've seen the turtle not so long ago.
Shelmers.
Yes, he's
Yeah,
still
he's
around.
special to me because I got to make his house.
Right. And I'll always treasure that, Amanda. And yeah, these characters are so special to me. And they aren't done yet. They're still going to see the light of day.
Can you tell us about some of the characters on this show? I know I met Okie Dokie.
You did. And this is the part I probably don't want to get into too much because they're still coming back.
Okay.
How can we pick up where we left off? Because I will talk about all of that, if that's okay with you. Is that okay with you?
Okay. That's fine.
The concept for this was to help teach character education in the schools. Robert W. Smith was one of the teachers in the music department at Troy University, and he was an arranger with Warner Brothers Publications. At that time, when we did this, he and his wife were pitching a new concept to Warner Brothers about how to teach music in the schools for children. And so he saw this and asked me about possibly coming to work on that project with them. And so this kind of had to be put aside for a while because I had to create new characters for Warner Brothers and create a new concept and the whole vision of what the television segments could look like for that curriculum. And that became Music Expressions is the name of the curriculum. It's all over the country now. And the DVD part of that is called Mr. Art's Music Room. And so the puppets and I teach concepts through the video series that supplement the lessons that the teacher is teaching in the classroom.
Now, can we talk about the characters from that show?
Oh,
Is
yes.
that okay?
Absolutely. And
I don't think I ever met them. I've seen pictures of them, but I haven't met them. So who did we have?
well, we decided to introduce them grade by grade. This curriculum goes from kindergarten through 5th grade. And of course, I thought a penguin is the most natural character to have as a mascot. And so we have Maestro the penguin, and we meet him in kindergarten. They all have musical names. In 1st grade, we meet Cadenza the cat and Largo the snail. And Cadenza is very much, she has stars in her eyes. She wants to go to Broadway and be a star. Has her own
That's
dressing
perfect.
room, all of that. And Largo moves slowly, of course. And in 2nd grade, we meet Octavia the octopus. And she lives in a huge aquarium, and these are all puppets, large puppets. I think it took 4 people to operate her, 1 in the head, and then They each had 2 rods, so four arms here and then 4 arms the other puppeteer. And then in 3rd grade we meet Gusto, the bulldog, and he's rough and tough, and I don't want to hear any more about this music. That's his initial attitude, and he comes around. And then in 5th grade we meet the zebra, and she's a traditional zebra, but her stripes turn into piano keys. And she only speaks in musical tones. So we would say, "How are you today?" And she would say, "Boop, boop." And then the scripts would reflect, "Oh, you're doing fine. I'm so glad." So you could know what she supposedly had said. So on the heels of producing Here We Grow in 1999, then I turned to do the work for Warner Brothers and designed the characters, drew them first, and took them to the team of authors, and they looked at them, approved, didn't approve, requested changes, whatever. And then once the characters were approved and set, then they would start sending me the topics they needed me to write scripts about with the puppets for a DVD segment. We had a company in Nashville that made the puppets for us, that could make them to look like my drawings, and then we did that production work in 2003 in Orlando, Florida. And so that has been the extent to the date of my work in television for children, but I still want to get back into it. The subsequent years since then, I have spent 6 years teaching elementary music, and have then gone to get my doctorate to teach.
But you added some puppetry in your classroom, did you not?
Oh yes, yes, yes. In fact, some of the same characters that we used on Here We Grow, I built homes for them so they could live in the classroom, and the children really loved that. It's interesting that I did all of this work for them through video before I ever had first-hand experience working with them. I knew that's what I wanted to do from that young experience, or that young opportunity on Young World. But it sounds cliche, but it truly changed my life to be able to teach them face to face, and convinced me more than ever that's where I have a real passion for children and helping them grow in healthy ways.
Now, what were some of the realizations that you came to with working with kids face to face?
That's a very good question. The first things that come to mind is the value that they have, just the way they are. We often are inclined to say, "When you grow up," or "How old are you?" And that, I'm afraid, sends the message that they may not have value right now, that they're important because of what they can be. Mm-hmm. Being a person of faith, I think Christ knew something when he said to us, "Unless we become like little children, we can't inherit the kingdom of God. And of such is the kingdom of heaven." There's something about children that we're to emulate. And I think that has to do with their honesty, their purity, their innocence, their vulnerability. Children are exceedingly important, and it's important that we do our part to help them appreciate who they are now and help steer them in the direction that they can become all they can be. The love of the little children, there's just nothing like that. They loved me, and it was because they knew I loved them. And of those students that I taught all those years ago now, they've graduated, they're in college, some of them are married, some have had children now. But those 6 years were exceedingly important and really confirmed a lot for me.
What would you bring, what message would you bring with your children's shows that you feel maybe is lacking in television right now? What?
We always can have programs, and we need programs that deal with the character traits that we need, so that help make our world go around. Honesty, kindness, fairness, trust, responsibility, patience. tolerance, all of those things. And it's more the affective domain. You know, you have the cognitive domain of teaching them letters and numbers, and then you have the affective that's how to handle their emotions and their feelings and their character. And that's definitely more on the side of my interest in wanting to help them. If these things are in place, it won't be any problem to learn what they need to know, but there are some things children need. I love the way Mr. Rogers put it. He said there are 7 things that are prerequisites for children to be ready to learn, and they were such things as a sense of trust, times of solitude, the capacity to look and listen carefully. And in thinking too about what we may need on television today that we are not getting as much as we should, television in more recent years has gone toward a pretty steady diet of animation. And I think we're missing something. Animation can be very realistic these days, but there's something about what you and I are doing right now and communicating with children that way, letting them know that there are adults that they can get to know, who love what they do, who are passionate about what they do, who find ways to express themselves that don't hurt themselves or anyone else for that matter. And I feel like there was one other point I wanted to make about that. Yes, just letting children see a person. I've been encouraged in recent years to hear that some children's programming production companies are requesting more programs with live people. So I think it's wonderful that we're providing that as an alternative to animation. And I think back to my own childhood, Young World. Part of the reason I was so drawn to that was because I was a puppeteer and I saw puppets and real people, you know, and knowing that someone cared about me. I just don't think animation can ever truly replace the impact and influence that a person can have.
Now, you've always had a big interest in music. How did that start, and how has that played into puppetry and children's programming?
The music started when I was 4. And my parents say I would go to the piano and pick out hymns and beg them to let me take piano lessons. And they said, but Art, you have to know how to read first. And so when I turned 7 or so, I knew how to read, and it was time to take some piano lessons. I took a year or 2 and quit because I wasn't having fun playing the music that my teacher was giving me to play.
Was it Miss Terry?
It was. And it's not her fault at all. She would tell you how precocious I certainly was.
She used to tell me he had such a good ear for music. He could cheat if he wanted to cheat. He would come in here and play it. I'm like, did you read those notes?
That reminds me. Yeah, she told my parents, I guess, and they've told me that she learned pretty quick that she couldn't play things for me, but have to read them, and I'll always be thankful she did that. But then my parents started taking me to the musical productions at Troy State, and I fell in love with that orchestral music and all of that, and just kept playing the piano through the years. I played French horn in the band starting in 5th grade, did that through the end of college. But it was really that interest in piano, and specifically when I was a junior in high school and heard Johnny Costa playing in the background of Mr. Rogers and thought, that's the way I want to play. That's when my piano took off. I don't remember ever officially declaring a major in music. I took my transcriptions that I'd written of the way Johnny played the songs to Troy State University and played for Dr. William Dennison, that many people will remember.
Dennison?
Yeah, he was the longtime choral director there and chair of the department. And so they offered me a scholarship to come that fall and play piano for the chorus. And I don't know who the person was that had the foresight to say, we need to get you going in music theory, because I hadn't even declared a major. But I'm very glad they did. I would have been behind if they hadn't gotten me started in music classes. I also enjoyed taking some art classes along the way, just a couple, to have a chance to see what that would be like. And that's another interest, obviously, that I have. But the music is what I stuck with, and particularly music education, choral music education. Well, as a music educator, you're certified to teach preschool through 12th grade. And so my first teaching job after college was at Phoenix City, at Central High School. I taught 9th through 12th grade chorus there, and then came back for the master's degree, and then got involved with the Warner Brothers work. And then after we finished that, taught 6 years of elementary school, and then went for my doctorate, and now I'm teaching future music educators in the university setting who want to work with children. You asked me what role the music has played. Of course, music, I think, is a huge part of any effort for children through the media. I have thought it carries the program as much as the dialogue does. Mm-hmm. And so writing the songs for the program and being able to play the underscore music underneath it, it's been a natural bend to include the music. And of course what we did for Warner Brothers, that was music based. And so the music played into that very heavily.
And you did some acting as well while you were in school. You played some
Yes.
roles, and do you feel like that helped you gain more of a experience as far as interacting with an audience?
I hope not.
You hope not?
Because in those situations I was playing a role, mm-hmm. and I really try to be who I am and only want to be who I am.
So for kids you want to be authentic?
Absolutely.
As much as possible?
Yes. And not put on a hat or something and play a character. But I did enjoy the acting. It wasn't my major area, but Troy State University at the time, Troy University now, it was small enough that they needed us to be involved in many things. You remember. And I think it was a wonderful time because having grown up going to the musicals and loving them so much, I wanted to be involved in them. And that's how that came about.
How much are you involved in your own creation of characters and environments that the characters inhabit? Do you pull in other people to help with that, or is it usually you coming up with these concepts and characters?
Well, when we did Here We Grow, I remember spending a lot of time in solitude and really, really thinking, I want to develop a set of characters that I will never have to revisit this again. I want a set that I can just live with. And then, of course, the Warner Brothers opportunity came along, and that was a different set of characters. But there was a lot of time in solitude and thinking about, what kind of characters would it be, what kind of message, and what's the concept? What is the concept that would be something that would really be meaningful and successful? And I remember talking about it with many, many people along the way, professors at Troy, two in particular that I remember that gave very specific aspects of the ideas that have lingered. Feeding the well, that's a concept I'm sure you understand. And Julia Cameron, who wrote that wonderful series, The Artist's Way and Walking in This World, she talks about the importance of feeding the well with images and whatever, taking yourself to a thrift shop or whatever would inspire you. And so looking at different images of the animals that I was thinking about creating, whatever the concepts were, trying to explore and have images on the wall. And you know what else? I remember having index cards that had every letter of the alphabet, and I put them up on the wall, and I would sit there and think, okay, I know this character name is going to start with one of these letters. And I would look at the A, look at the B. And I still have all of those brainstorms, concepts, and I don't want to get rid of it because even though it all kind of manifested and gelled into something that I'm very proud of now, it's nice to look back and see all that thought process that went into the creation of it. And the same is very much true with what we did with music expressions.
And you come up with personalities
Mm-hmm.
and voices. You do different voices for different characters as well.
Yes, yes. Sitting and writing the script, I was talking in their voices. When we did the actual production work, the Penguin is the only one that I ended up actually speaking for. And we were very fortunate to have, I mean, they had the budget. Mm-hmm. We had Disney puppeteers that came in and did the operation of the characters, but we had other people who voiced them. And the reason for that, it's not necessarily ideal, but the reason was because before we made the video part, we had recorded CDs with these characters speaking. So we had chosen the voice actors before the videos were made. But the Penguin talks like this. Hello, Mr. Art. I'm Maestro.
I love it.
And that's his voice. Goodness. And Largo's a very slow snail. They all have their different personalities. I had my versions of their voices. Quite similar actually to what they ended up being. As I said, the bulldog was very, I don't want to hear any more of this talk about music. I don't know if I mentioned, the zebra, I think I said came in 5th grade. It actually came in 4th grade. And her name was PF for pianoforte, since she had the keys. But in 5th grade, we introduced Bebop, the jazz cat. And everything he says, I thought it would be fun if it rhymed. And so he would say things like, now you're talking just my style. I think I'll stick around a while. And that was fun to write for him. Yeah. I remember along the way too, and this perhaps can be helpful to someone else who may watch this at some point, writer's block, sitting in front of the computer and just agonizing. And a very wise friend of mine, Gwen Threadgill, who lives in Troy, but she taught here in Brundage. She was the band director for some time in the early 80s. But she said to me on the phone during that hard time of writing, she said, if you would get away from that computer and start pushing your pencil, the ideas would come. And I did.
Well, I've heard of writers that some professional writers still use a typewriter because that's how their ideas flow the best.
David McCullough is one of those. The historian, he has a little writing shed.
Really?
And he has his old-fashioned typewriter and does that. Writing by hand is exceedingly important to me and has become very special to me because I do a good bit of journaling. I've heard that you retain more if you write it, that longhand, that something about it helps us slow down the pace of our brain and our hand. And that's a very unscientific way of sharing things that I've read along the way. But there are studies to that end. And at the same time, I can type much more quickly, and it just comes almost too fast that way. So different strokes for different folks, and whatever works, right?
What have been, speaking of that, what would have been some of your greatest sources of inspiration in your life to keep you inspired?
I love that question. Zig Ziglar, who was a very popular motivational speaker, talked about having a wall of gratitude in his home. And he had pictures of the people that would fit the answer to your question that he could see. And I've done that in the past. I don't have it in the house I'm currently living in, but I have in the past and plan to again in the future, because you know one of my goals is to have a writing shed, and I want to have that in there. Certainly my parents, well, the Lord, first of all, of course. My parents continue to be my greatest supporters, cheerleaders. And then I would say definitely Marge Payne, the lady that created and hosted Young World. She became a real mentor, and we kept in touch until her death. And I could call her when I was teaching the children in elementary school and say, now this is what they're doing. And she would say, now Art, this is what they're thinking. Because she and her husband had started 2 schools in Montgomery. She was an elementary music, not elementary music, but an elementary teacher and elementary administrator. So I'll definitely include her. I would definitely include Fred Rogers. Learned so much from him. about how to interact with children and what's important in their lives. Do we need to pause?
Okay. Here we go.
Where should I go back to?
You said Fred Rogers.
Yeah.
And
Do you think we got all of this stuff about Marge Payne?
I think it was.
we would
Yeah.
have it here if not there.
Yes.
correct?
That's
It
true.
would be on one of them.
Okay, so I'll start. I would definitely add Fred Rogers to the list because he played an exceedingly important role and influence in my life. It was a real joy to meet him. I wondered how I would feel. I mean, you can imagine, growing up like so many of us did watching him. But he was just as normal and natural in who he was off camera. During a break, one of the days I was there, I said, "You've been so fortunate to work in a medium that has allowed you to reach so many people." I will never forget what he said. He said, "Art, please don't underestimate the power of narrow casting." And I thought, what in the world was he talking about? But I believe what he was saying, he was comparing broadcasting to narrow casting. Because what he went on to say right after that was, there is no way I could know the needs of all the people who watch the neighborhood. All I can do is try to produce something of value and trust that the Holy Spirit will do the rest.
Wow.
And he would tell stories about, well, I may be confusing him with someone else, but I've heard preachers say that people will come up to them after a lesson and say, "When you said this and this and this and this, it was exactly what I needed to hear." And the preacher thinking back will think, "I didn't say anything like that." Mr. Rogers considered the space between the television screen and the child watching as holy ground. And he said there's a lot that happens there in that space. He also said that the entire thing of making the program was about looking into the television camera and offering as much love as you possibly could to someone who might be watching and need it. And I think that's it. He said love is at the root of all learning. And then he said love or the lack of it. I could go on and give you example after example of the philosophies like that have greatly impacted me, but more germane maybe to what we're talking about that might be especially meaningful to others watching, because I think it does very much apply to our work as creative artists. He used the model of a triangle, and he said, if I love something, and you know that I love you, you're going to be much more likely to want to love that something too. He said if we want children to grow to love something, all you have to do is show them someone loving it in front of them. Because he believed in the old Quaker saying that attitudes are caught, not taught. A lot of rich stuff. He would definitely be on my list. Then I would mention preachers, definitely preachers that have been influential. There have been teachers along the way that I've been exceedingly grateful for. And I would also include the children.
I was going to say, did the children ever inspire ideas that you might not have ever
Absolutely.
thought of before, or added to something that you were thinking about and it's, oh, this is a completely different approach? And
Oh, yes. Yes. One of the things I built to have as a puppet place in my classroom was a big tree. And there was something in it that would go back and forth or whatever in the tree, a bell. And I had made the tree, you could get in it, and I had a rope that I strung down through the branch so that I could pull it inside the tree and it would make the bell go back and forth. Well, during the class sometimes I would say, I wonder what the character that lives in the tree is doing. Why don't we go see? And I would say, I'm going to go around to the back and knock on the door. And that would allow me to get back there. And I would say, now I'll be right back. And I would get in the tree and then have the conversation. Would you please go? We're so glad to see you. Would you please go out and say hello to our friends? And the character would say, of course, of course. And so one day, a child said in class, Mr. Art, why do you always have to go behind that tree for that puppet to come out? Except they didn't call it a puppet. At the time, they thought it was real, I think. And I thought, oh no, they're starting to catch on. I've got to do something. So I took some fishing wire, tied it to that rope in the tree, and I strung it across the room to where I would sit to teach them, thinking I was going to be so clever. And I could just give it a little tug, and it would make that bell start going back and forth. Well, they got so excited when they saw that start doing that without me over there. And then I went over there and did it business as usual. I'll go around and see. And that let me get in there to operate the puppet. Well, I thought it had gone off without a hitch until the children started lining up to go back to their classroom. And one little boy said, Mr. Art, there's a cobweb over there and you almost stepped in it. He had seen the fishing line and thought it was a cobweb. Nothing like it. And I'm very thankful to have kept a notebook through the years I was there that I just called funnies. And I would write the funny things down that they said, and there are many of them.
Now, if they ever wanted to talk to the character some other time, was there another way? Or was it only during those moments? I'm asking if he had a mailbox.
Yes.
He did?
Yes. Another character in there had a mailbox, and the children would write him letters. And they would come into class and go over there and stuff their letter to him in there. And they got so excited when he would come out. Had another little bird character that had a little club, because that character was very invested in looking for children who are trying to help make our world a better place. And so they would write him letters. I still have all of these, and he would give them a certificate telling them that they were part of the little club, you know. I just wanted it to be like Disney World for them. And it's been so interesting in recent years. I run into them, you know, around town or whatever, and they will always say how much they remember that class and the puppets. And that's just some of their fondest memories.
Did you inspire any little puppeteers to start making puppets?
Well, of course, I can't say for sure, but there was one, maybe two. One of them was already in middle school, or not middle school, but junior high. And he popped his head in one day. He was interested in ventriloquism, and he said, "Are you Mr. Art?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Somebody told me I should come see you." And so then he and I built up a little connection, of course, and we would go back and forth about ventriloquism and things like that. The other one I'm thinking about, I had him from the time he was in kindergarten, and he became very interested in puppets. And even his mother reached out to see if I would make one in his presence. She would bring him over and we would spend time, and I built one for him so he could see how it was done, and he went on to make his own. And he's graduating from college this semester. I'm going up later this month to attend his senior recital. He's also studying music education. That's not quite right, not music education, but vocal performance and theater. He's interested in both of those.
Now, do you have any upcoming projects? I know you probably don't want to share everything. You don't want to give away the surprise, but you're still working on programs for kids or plays for kids, puppet shows.
Yes, yes. I'm very interested in following up and doing some more work through the media for children. At this point, I think it's online.
I was going to ask, had you ever thought about doing it on a smaller scale rather than a television on a set? It could be just from your home.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And of course, just like we're doing today, I mean, technology is here, and we've never had it easier. I'm still in touch with a friend that was on Young World in the background, and she said, "You have in your laptop now what we had to have an entire control room, you know, for back then. And the cameras fit in your hand. And I mean, they used to be these monstrous things. So it's much easier. And I'm amazed to look at people the number of people who are producing videos for YouTube and all of these other outlets, and thinking, wow, everybody's a video producer these days. There's so many more. And then I think back to my little years growing up, pretending I was making a program, and it's almost like if it ends up being that way, that it's something on a smaller scale, boy, that will really be a full circle moment. I'll be back producing a program.
You'll be back in your room with your little cardboard camera.
Exactly. Yeah, that definitely is true. And to be able to go outside. Back then they had a hard time going on location, and now we don't even think about it. Just take our phone with us.
I know you've talked to me about having big dreams of what you want to do in the future, but you just told me you're important where you're at now. Do you ever think about that as far as thinking of yourself and all you've accomplished so far?
I hope I didn't say that I am important where I am now.
No, you were talking about in terms of kids. That when they talk to kids, it's when you grow up. It's like only when you're
yes,
older you
yes.
can do such and such. And I think about my life, and I feel like there's so many more things I want to do, and I haven't done everything I want to do, and I never stop to think, well, maybe I don't look at who I am right now, and that person has value too, just in the moment.
I understand everything you just said very well. I feel as though I do, because I think about it too. I'm at the point of thinking there's a finite amount of time left. It could happen sooner than I'm expecting, but you know, what is the greatest use of the time that's left? And it's easy to get trapped in that, and then to not realize that, wait a minute, what is the saying? Life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. And it's important, and I'm glad you said that. It's helpful for me to hear it, that it's important that we take time to acknowledge where we are and where we have been.
I'm just thinking aloud, and I'm thinking of the lessons, the things you've told me that kids need to know, and I'm just thinking about how much adults need to know. I have so many friends that I've spoken with who we appreciate Mr. Rogers so much more now than we did growing up, because just the positivity, the influence that he was very genuine, he was very kind, and he had such important things to say that affect you as an adult just as much as it would a child. Mm-hmm. And we see that. We see the full value of that now, I think, more than we did when we were little kids. So I really hope you keep doing what you're doing. I think it's really important.
Thank you. I do want to say thank you for the invitation to be here and to be a part of this. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful idea that you're documenting and doing interviews with creative artists, because there are so many of them. And the arts are so often the first to go.